A war in Europe, a seriously divided alliance. Right now, the United States and its European allies are clashing over the best path to peace in Ukraine. Today, we're going to break down this diplomatic divide and, what it really means for the future of this conflict.
And it all really kicked into high gear with this very blunt assessment from President Donald Trump about European leaders. I mean, this single quote, it just perfectly captures that growing frustration you're seeing out of Washington, and it really sets the stage for a major clash.
So let's really dig into this, because Trump's critique, it goes way beyond just one quote. This is a fundamental attack on how America's allies have been handling the war from the get-go.
Okay, so the view from the White House is pretty clear. Europe is seen as a continent in decline, kind of hobbled by what they're calling weak leadership. The central accusation? Well, that European nations are just dragging their feet, not providing the kind of decisive military and political support that Ukraine needs. And from Washington's point of view, this hesitation is the #1 reason the war is still raging.
Now, as you can probably imagine, this did not go over well in Europe, but the response wasn't totally unified. What we saw was this really fascinating mix of outright defiance and some very careful, very strategic diplomacy.
Germany's response was incredibly blunt. I mean, Chancellor Friedrich Merz didn't even bother to debate the point. He just called Trump's remarks incomprehensible. It's a really clear signal that Europe feels it can defend its own values without, getting lectures from the US.
And you can see the two different strategies at play right here. Over on the left, you've got Germany's direct, almost confrontational pushback. But then on the right, Ukraine is playing a totally different game. They're pivoting away from this war of words and focusing on concrete diplomacy with the European Union.
So what's Ukraine's next move? Well, they're not just sitting around. They're finalizing a brand new peace plan to present directly to the US. But, and this is key, they're also sending a very clear message. This plan is just paper unless Russia is actually genuinely willing to stop the war.
And this brings us right back to the American strategy. Because while all the public talk is pretty fiery, behind the scenes in Washington, the focus is reportedly laser sharp on one single goal.
And what's that goal? Ending this conflict and ending it fast. Sources in Washington are saying that President Trump is personally driving what they're calling an urgent settlement.
And this quote right here, this really reveals the thinking behind that urgency. The White House seems to believe that Russia currently has the upper hand, and that assessment is exactly why they're pushing so hard for a deal as soon as possible, even if it means everyone has to swallow a pretty difficult compromise.
But what does a difficult compromise actually mean in the real world? This is where the whole plan gets highly, highly controversial.
This is the huge question being debated in the halls of Washington right now. If peace is the goal, what is the acceptable price? And maybe more importantly, who is going to have to pay it?
And here it is, the heart of the whole controversy. The reports we're seeing indicate that U.S. negotiators are pressuring Ukraine to do what was once unthinkable, to actually cede territory. We're talking parts of the Donbas region, the very center of this conflict, all in exchange for a peace deal. This is a massive shift.
Yeah, so this reported pressure campaign is setting off all kinds of alarm bells in Congress. Lawmakers are asking a pretty simple question: why does it seem like the burden of compromise is falling so much more heavily on Ukraine? It really brings up a fundamental issue of fairness. Are we pressuring the victim more than the aggressor here?
So let's zoom out for a second. Why does a diplomatic fight over one country matter to the rest of the world? Well, because the outcome here could set a precedent with consequences that would literally ripple across the entire globe.
Look, we're not just talking about Ukraine's borders. What's truly at stake here is the future of European security, the unity of the entire NATO alliance, and the very balance of global power that has really defined the last several decades. So as the world watches Ukraine's next move and waits for Washington's response, this is the critical question we're left with. Can you actually force a peace deal without completely fracturing the very alliances that were built to prevent war in the first place?